Mapping the foundations of strategic thought usually involves Western anchors. We cite Clausewitz for the theory of absolute war and study Sun Tzu for the mechanics of deception. But there is another text that models the true friction of statecraft with equal sophistication. That text is the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata. The chessboard running behind the central figure on this cover art is a deliberate signal. This text is a study of structural warfare and complex strategic decision-making. The text classifies itself as itihasa, a didactic framework designed to simulate existential human conditions rather than record chronological positivist history. Idealized theories of leadership function perfectly in a vacuum. The Mahabharata earns its place in the strategic canon because it models the actual messy friction of executing strategy when ideal conditions collapse. In the other major Indian epic, the Ramayana, the world operates on clear moral binaries. The lines between right and wrong, good and evil, are rigidly defined. The Mahabharata operates differently. It places its leaders in situations where competing moral imperatives inevitably collide. These absolute rules constantly bleed together into a murky middle ground, forcing its leaders to operate entirely within a strategic gray zone. The core conceptual engine driving decisions in this space is dharma, a dynamic, algorithmic framework for resolving seemingly impossible dilemmas. This logic provides a mechanism for navigating the conflicting duties and layers of gray that define real-world leadership. The parameters of this framework are defined in the Shanti Parva by the elder statesman Bhishma. Bhishma defines dharma through the lens of function and utility, prioritizing the practical application of a decision over a static dictionary definition. This diagram maps Bhishma's definition, dividing dharma into three core functional pillars. First, an action must lead to advancement and growth. Second, the action must restrict creatures from injuring one another. Third, the action must uphold and sustain the overarching social order. When a leader is trapped in a gray zone, any potential decision must be measured against these three functional requirements to be considered legitimate. Leaders in the Mahabharata apply this calculus under a specific environmental constraint. They are fighting during the Dwapara Yuga. In ancient Indian chronology, this specific historical epoch represents a period of severely degraded ethical thresholds across the geopolitical landscape. The defining danger of this environment is asymmetry. Pursuing righteousness and playing strictly by the rules guarantees zero reciprocity from your adversary. In a degraded environment, a strict adherence to absolute truth or standard rules of engagement creates a predictable, exploitable liability. Survival in these conditions requires strategic exceptionalism, an adaptability that recognizes rigid idealism as a fatal vulnerability. We see this framework applied at the micro-tactical level when the warrior Arjuna faces a dilemma regarding an ascetic brahmana whose cattle have been stolen. The first vector of duty is clear. Arjuna has an explicit kshatriya, or warrior, responsibility to protect a vulnerable citizen, but he faces a strict conflicting constraint. His weapons are locked in a room he is sworn never to enter. Violating that personal pact triggers an automatic 12-year exile. This logic model maps the two options against Bhishma's pillars. Option A, doing nothing commits the adharma of negligence, violating the second pillar, preventing injury. Option B, entering the room breaks a personal promise, but protecting the citizen fulfills the third pillar, upholding social order. Arjuna evaluates the data and accepts the penalty. He retrieves his weapons, successfully defends the Brahmana's property, and subjects himself to the 12-year exile. The active protection of a vulnerable target outweighs rigid adherence to personal rules. The framework correctly prioritizes public function over individual purity. Scaling this calculus up to the macro level of statecraft, we examine King Dushanta and the concept of Raja Dharma, the specific duties required of a sovereign. The scenario is a crisis of succession. Dushanta knows privately that Shakuntala is his rightful wife, and that Bharata is his legitimate heir. Despite knowing this truth, when they present themselves at his court, he publicly rejects them. This split-screen node maps the structural conflict between personal truth and state stability. Dushanta delays acceptance until a divine voice announces their legitimacy. He requires undeniable public validation, so subjects never doubt the heir's right to rule. For a sovereign operating under Raja Dharma, The overarching stability of the state must temporarily supersede personal truth to prevent a societal fracture. A rigid, encyclopedic knowledge of rules proves insufficient for leadership in complex environments. The Mahabharata forces its practitioners to confront its most challenging paradox: the mathematical justification for using adharma, unrighteousness and deceit, to defeat an adversary. The text defines this as apadharma, or dharma in times of extreme adversity. It provides a legal mechanism for suspending standard martial conventions to ensure survival. When the opposition weaponizes the rules to destroy the system, you execute the illegal move to neutralize the threat. There is one absolute constraint built into this theory. Exceptionalism is only valid if its explicit purpose is to restore cosmic and social balance. It is never permitted for personal gain. This metric separates the text's protagonists from its antagonist, Duryodhana. His pursuit of power relied entirely on deceit, but it lacked any overarching systemic anchor. The Mahabharata remains a masterwork of strategic thought because it acknowledges the true burden of command. The hardest choices are rarely between right and wrong. They are choices between competing catastrophic duties.